It's against this background that we see the entrance of Neoplatonism. And there were many distinguished thinkers who are under the category of Neoplatonists, but the founder of this movement was a man by the name of Plotinus. And Plotinus lived in the 3rd century, born around 203, died around 270. Now, when Plotinus developed his form of philosophy, which was an attempt to restructure and reconstruct Plato, he did it as a conscious alternative to Christianity. He was aware of the widespread influence of Christian thought. He opposed Christian thought at the intellectual level and saw it as fallacious and had destroyed the brilliance of Plato's contribution to the world. And so he sought to come up with a philosophical alternative to Christianity. Now, many of the features that we find in his philosophy show certain stark similarities to a movement that began earlier that the Christian church had to confront in its earliest days, which was the heresy of Gnosticism, which was a syncretistic religion that blended together all sorts of ideas from Oriental dualism, Persian mysticism, Greek philosophy, and a little dab of Christianity in it. But we're going to leave that aside for the sake of time in this and look more specifically at Platonism, or Neoplatonism. Plotinus did not reject rationality, but believed that the highest source of knowledge was through mystical intuition. In fact, the only real avenue to ultimate truth came through mystical experience. And there were very few people who were gifted with mystical intuition, who were part of what we might call here the mystical elite. Now, it's at this point that we see one clear point of contact with earlier Gnosticism, because the Gnostics repudiated the ordinary ways of knowing through reason and sense perception, and believed that the only true way of knowing God or ultimate truth was through some kind of direct, immediate intuition that only a few gifted people had, who were the Gnostikoi, those who were, quote, in the know. So we see a similarity there between Gnosticism and Plotinus at this point. But for Plotinus, the good life, the virtuous life, is the life of the mystic, who makes a pilgrimage along life's way from being preoccupied with the physical world, where most people spend their lives just as materialists. Their whole life is focused on things that you can handle, taste, touch, see, and hear, and that sort of thing. And he said that the first step beyond that is to the contemplative life, whereby the mind rises above the shadowy cave of Plato, where people are locked into the world of material things, the world of the receptacle. Remember, Plato wanted us to get out of the cave of sense perception and into the realm of the mind, where contemplation is the highest source of truth. Well, Plotinus adds a new dimension to this, that there's still another stage after that, and it is the stage of mystical union. Now, how does this fit with Christianity? You read the New Testament, and there are obviously elements of mysticism found within it. And Paul's up in the third heaven, and Paul talks about our union with Christ, what we would call the mystical union of the believer with Christ, and so on. But there's a different kind of thinking in historic Christian mysticism from what we find in these ancient philosophies. For the ancient mystic, This stage of progression, this movement, this pilgrimage that I've talked about, that begins with sense perception or sensation, and then moves through contemplation, and then moves to what the mystics call communio, which is a being with God, a communion with God. We talk in Christian theology about the communion of the saints, in the sense in which we have fellowship with each other, not only with those who are alive, but with those who are part of the church, past, present, and future, and so on. But that's more or less the end of the road for Christian mysticism. The highest form of mysticism is to have this mystical communion with God. But not so with Plotinus and other mystics. The next stage is unio, where you become one with God. Now, this is a common feature in Eastern religions, where the goal of your religious experience is to lose your personal identity, to become one with the oversoul. And so often you'll hear the illustration of the drop of water that falls into the ocean, that loses its identity as it becomes absorbed into the whole of things. Now, this is significant for Plotinus because of his concept of God. For Plotinus, God is called the One, with a capital O, Hohen, the One, where he calls God one in such a way that would suggest a pure pantheism.